The grammar of the original language bears that out. We see that word in a past tense, he, although he existed in the form or nature of God, we see that as how he was at the beginning. But that particular word, you remember when you were in elementary school, we had to learn that stuff like past, present, and future? I ran, I will run, I am running. You had to learn it all that way, or at least we were supposed to. Didn't make much sense then. Well, it's even more confusing when you get to Greek because they have more than past, present, future. And this particular word means this: he exists. But it would be bad English grammar to say he exists in the form of God when you're speaking past time, but that would be more proper. It's why when Exodus chapter 3, Noah sees a bush that's burning but not consumed, and the voice, which I believe is the pre-incarnate Jesus, that it speaks in answer to the question, who do I tell Israel is sending me? And the voice says, you tell them, I am. I am the existing one, the one who exists, the one who is always in the present, even when he's in the past. And if that doesn't hurt your head, you're not paying attention. But that's who he is. He's not limited by time. He's not limited by space. The point is this. You're going, because we're not talking about marriage, twice as hard to drag. So a couple of hunters came by and said, you know, if you drag that the other way, the hair lays down smooth, whole lot easier to slide. And the two Texans, man, they just started dragging it. He says, oh, man, this is a whole lot easier. And he goes, I know, but we're getting a long way from the truck. Not a lot of hunters in here. I see that, okay. So you're thinking we're getting a long way from the truck, but here's what it has to do with marriage. Jesus took a submissive role. He went from the creator of the universe to someone who had to be cared for completely. He wasn't even able to speak. He needed to be diapered. He needed to be fed. He needed to be cared for. He was completely dependent as he took this submissive role. But from the time he was in the throne room to the time he became flesh to the time that he was exalted, he never quit being all 100% God. He didn't exchange humanity for his divinity. He maintained his divinity while he took on his humanity. And so when a wife who is created in the image of God is given independent value, submits herself, she is not becoming a lesser. She's not becoming an inferior. In fact, Philippians chapter 2 goes on to say that once that work was done, God did what? He glorified him. He exalted him. In other words, there was an honor bestowed upon him for doing that, even though he was due all the honor in the first place. And so we have a wife that takes a role and puts her feet into those little constraining shoes of submissiveness. And some of us think, you know, that ain't much of a job. That's pretty easy. That's pretty cushy. And I would challenge you that it's not. I will say that at times it's probably less than attractive. Before my dad's passing a number of years ago, he believed that the very best tire that you could put on your car was what he called the Michelin tire. Now, the Michelin tire is a pretty good piece of rubber on a car, and you pay dearly for it. It performs well, lasts longer, but it has a price tag on it. But I can tell you from personal experience, though I don't have time to share the full story, that it does not matter what kind of tire you have on your car if the $2.50 lug nuts on the wheel fail, except to see how high that tire bounces as it goes through the ditch. Now, I don't want you to tell your wife that I said that she was that she was the stud on a tire and you're the Michelin. But I do mean it this way, that at times that thing that seems to be unsightly, that is submissiveness, utilitarian, inferior in some ways, is ultimately valuable. So not only is it not always appealing to be submissive, it's really, really hard to be submissive. Let's take, for example, the relationship that we have with Jesus Christ. Let's get past the gender aspect of it for just a moment, but Jesus is described as the groom of the church of which most, if not all of us, are a part. and that the bride is the church. So that means that us individually are the bride of Christ, and he is the perfect husband. He is one who cares and loves always for his bride. He always is seeking her best interest, our best interest. He doesn't lash out in unwarranted anger. In fact, he has demonstrated the ultimate love by willing to die for us. And sometimes I have a hard time submitting to him. Not because of him, because it's hard to be in control of my own life. That's the kind of guy I am, and it is hard for me to submit to a perfect spouse in the person of Jesus. Meanwhile, there's you and I. We're finding our way through this thing calling being a husband. We are not always the most loving and caring. We do not always sacrifice ourselves. We rarely actually die for our wife, and we're certainly at times not willing to live for her. We do lash out sometimes in unwarranted anger. We think about ourselves over her, and yet our wife quietly slips on those shoes of submissiveness. Not because we're worth it, but because she's being submissive to someone who is greater than the two of us. That's hard to do. It's hard to do when Jesus we submit to. It's even harder to do with you and I, who at times can be buffoons. I hope that's not a euphemism for a bad word, but it's what it is. We're buffoons. So, we have to get that understanding of submissiveness, but at the same time, the wife needs to understand, it's what Tammy shared with the ladies right now, what submissiveness looks like. Submissiveness is not this. Fine. It's not digging all four hooves in as the husband drags the wife along, and just because they're going the same direction, she in some way has submitted. What it means is, as that definition said, it is a voluntary attitude of giving in, cooperating, assuming responsibility, and carrying a burden. Let's take it away from the marriage for the purpose of illustration for a moment. Let's go to the corporate world. Big boardroom, giant oak table there. The board of directors is surrounding that. They're making the decisions regarding the direction of the company. Maybe it's something they're going to invest in or something that they're going to modify. And so they go around the table, and for the most part, the decision is that it seems the consensus is that we should go this way. One of the board members stands up and says, I don't agree with that. I think it's a bad idea, and here's why. And he offers his reasoning, and there's some discussion, there's some debate. I don't know, maybe even emotions flare in the whole thing, but finally it comes time to make a decision. They decide to go the way of the majority, and the one guy is left out as far as his perspective. Now, he's got three opportunities. The first is, I quit. I'm not going to be any more part of this tomfoolery. I'm out of here. Secondly, he could do the fine. But when this thing all goes belly up, don't come crying to me. I'm the guy that had the voice of reason and said we shouldn't do it. The third, which really is the illustration of submissiveness, that's when he says, very well, I default to the wisdom of the whole for the well-being of the company. Not only will I go along, I'm going to be on the front lines doing absolutely everything I can to make this the best decision our company has ever made. Now, when you have board members with that kind of perspective, do you know what happens to those corporations? They flourish. Let's go something maybe a little closer to home. In a local congregation, a group of elders, a group of shepherds discussing not the direction of doctrine, those things are already set, but maybe they're talking about the need to expand the building. Do we build on? Do we remodel? Do we rent? Do we sell this, build something new? Do we buy something that's already in existence? And so they're having a discussion, and for the most part, they're leaning then one particular way, and one of the shepherds says, I don't think that's a good idea. He has a perspective. He shares his perspective. There's some discussion. There's some debate. There's even the possibility that maybe emotions get kind of ramped up in all of that conversation. I am not going to be part of this anymore. Number 2 is, well, fine. But I'll just tell you right now, if anybody asks me, I'm going to tell them it's a terrible idea. I'm not going to be in part of it. The third is, very well, I'm going to submit to the wisdom of the whole for the well-being of this church. Not only am I going to go along, I'm going to be out front, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make this the best decision this church has ever done. And you know what happens in churches where shepherds have that mindset? A mindset of submissiveness. They flourish. Now let's go to a marriage. Husband comes in and says, hey, I saw online a great job opportunity in Cleveland. I think I should pursue it. And his wife says no one ever, right? You're from Cleveland. I've been there. It's a great town. But I'm just saying, she goes, And so they have some discussion. They have some debate. In fact, let me add this. You would be foolish to not consider her input. This is a team thing. It's not just you giving orders. And so they have some discussion. They have some debate. It's a pretty big decision. Maybe even tensions are elevated. But finally, the husband says, after all that, yeah, I'm not only going to pursue it. If they offer me the job, I'm going to take it. Now, the wife has those same 3 options. Well, good. Have a terrible life. Because I'm not going. I quit. Or, fine, but I can just tell you when we get there, I'm going to be slow to unpack boxes, because when you find out how boneheaded this decision was, I won't have to repack everything when we come back to where we should have stayed in the first place. Or, she says, very well. She goes, I understand the arrangement that God has put in the marriage relationship. And as a result of that, I am going to submit to your wisdom for the well-being of our family in keeping with God's organizational structure. And not only am I going to go along, I'm going to do everything I can. Because see, in her mind are the instructions that come clearly for Scripture. We mentioned one of them last night, and that's in Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve both eat of the tree, and God said, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Whether or not that was always the intended arrangement, or if it came about as a result of that sin, the woman was given a submissive role. We come over and we look at passages like 1 Peter chapter 3 and a discussion of submissiveness in general, government and citizens, and masters and slaves. And though the 3 are not all equal across there is an equality in them, and that is a wife who apparently has a husband who's not a believer, and she is, at least to the extent that does not violate God's law, to be submissive to him, even if he is not a godly man in every respect. We know in the book of Titus, the letter to Titus, seems as if there was a church in disarray there. It's the reason Titus was there, and he was to put some things in order. And amongst the things to put in order, he said, tell the older women to teach the younger women how to love their husband and to be submissive to him. And in what every husband's favorite verse is from Ephesians chapter 5, right? We draw it like a gun. Wives, be in subjection to your husband, right? Kind of forgetting sometime the one that follows, and love your wives as Christ loved his church. There's no doubt that a wife understands her role of submissiveness as it is given by God, not by her husband. She's not really just submitting to you and I in our imperfections, but submitting to him, and that is hard. In fact, within that statement that God makes to Eve when he says, you're of the family every day. That's going to be something that is going to be a daily challenge. And I will say again, our greatest difficulty in this is not the influence of so-called feminism. The greatest difficulty in this is men who won't be men. Men who won't take their God-given role. I told you I like to drive. But sometimes when we used to drop my kids off at Oklahoma Christian in Oklahoma City and head back to Denver, it's a relatively easy drive, highway virtually all the way. You go north on 135 out of Oklahoma City. When you get to Salina, Kansas, you hang a left to the west, straight in on I-70 into Denver, Colorado. Easy drive unless you've been gone for a long weekend. It's late in the afternoon. The sun's beginning to set. It's warm in the car. Everybody else has gone to sleep. You begin to explore what both lanes look like. And Tammy will go, "You want me to drive?" And I go, "Oh no, I'm fine now. I'm just doing great, you know." But if I go out, if I go to sleep, I take my hands off the wheel, you know what she's going to do? Just sit back and take it. No, she's going to grab the wheel. She's going to nudge me. She's going to say, somebody's got to drive this. And in the absence of strong male spiritual leadership, many women who aren't desiring to take over the role of man said, somebody's got to drive this car. And we're finding them in single-parent homes where it's a mother there trying to raise her kid, being both mother and father because men aren't doing what's supposed to be, or some of those mothers who are raising their kids even when father is present because he's too busy with whatever else he's got to do. And they go, well, she's a feminist. You know what? She's trying to be the man in all of this. No, the fact is, she is smart, created in the image of God, and quite capable probably to do our job, but she knows it's not her job to do, but at times it needs to be done, and she steps over those lines because she has to or is forced into it. But being submissive is not an easy job for a wife because she's smarter, probably. She's certainly more insightful at times, and she's absolutely better looking than any of us. But she says, where are those small shoes? Where's that place of submissiveness? Here's the pill that for me is the hardest. I mentioned God created everything, and he said it's good. He looked over at Adam. I don't know why I picture him this way. Stark naked, just realized that this finger fits perfectly in this nostril, and he goes, not so much. It is not good that man should be alone. He creates Eve for him, and now he says, it is very good. Here's the implications of that. I am convinced that a man cannot reach his fullest potential without a woman by his side. That does not mean you have to be married to make it to heaven. That doesn't mean that single men are displeasing to God. But what it does mean is God said, by ourselves, we can't do completely what we need to do. That's why he gave us that helper or that helpmeet. Terrible translations in most of the versions, in my unscholared opinion. And the reason why is because that word helpmeet or helper shares the same root as a song that we sing that nobody rarely ever understands. Here I raise my Ebenezer. You know that one? I only knew one Ebenezer growing up, and he was not very nice at Christmas time, right? But it means stone of strength. Well, that Ezer part is part of this word of helper. And here's what God said. He goes, I will give him a strength. A wild breakout, and she might be running a rebellion, and we didn't even know about it. I mean, I thought she might get in there and say, you know, there are twice as many women on the planet as there are men. We should rule this marble, and away she goes. Kind of one of those Planet of the Apes moments. Don't tell your wife I thought of them as Planet of the Apes, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So I took a peek at her notes, and you know what she said? She said the wife is the shoe insert for her husband. And I thought, well, that's unsightly. But it resonated with me, and here's why. Though they may be fashionable, the Chuck Taylor All-Stars are perhaps the worst tennis shoe that has ever been created. They are nothing more than a piece of stamped rubber on the bottom. And though at my first seminar wearing one, I thought I was young, I realized the next morning, after having stood on a multi-purpose room tile floor the whole day in nothing but this stamped rubber, how old I really was. My back hurt, my legs hurt. I had to do what I thought I'd never have to do. Guys that are young, you're going to dread this day. I had to go to the old man section of the Walmart. You know where they have the knee pads, the knee braces and the elbow braces and the crutches and the bunion pads, and I had to buy a pair of shoe inserts. Now, I'm not that old. I didn't get the $50 ones. I got the 2 for $3.96 ones. And I put them in my shoes. In fact, they're in these tennis shoes today. And you know what? I realized the strength that is found with a shoe insert. To understand the value, the strength of a wife alongside of us to help us accomplish our purpose cannot be measured. That's how valuable it is. And God has called our wife to do that. And it is, just imagine being a shoe insert in your nasty shoes, in doing those dirty deeds, in being submissive even though she's capable of taking the reins and probably running it better than you, but she's willing to do it out of a love for you, out of her submissiveness for God, and a desire to be what God wants her to be. I think those are the most beautiful shoes of all. Now, by now, it may be that the shoe analogies are lost on you, so let me see if I can give you a better picture. If you are a golfer, it is the beauty of that helicopter shot that goes down the 18th at Augusta in Georgia, the home of the Masters, and you go, oh, to play there. If you're a fisherman, it's one of those high Rocky Mountain streams where it's just you and nature and a fish that is looking for the lure that you just tied on the end of your fly line. Kind of beautiful. It's that buck that's a couple of 100 yards away who turns broadside and looks at you with that, I'll just stand here and see if you think you can hit the broadside of a buck. Kind of beautiful. Anywhere near here, is there a Bass Pro Shop or a Cabela's? Or we ever been to one of those? You ever been to one of those and in the back they have the Boat Cathedral? You know the Boat Cathedral? It's got the glass up on top and around and angelic rays of light come in. In fact, you can almost hear the of the angels. You walk back there it sets before you. That Tracker bass boat, 26 foot, with that Mercury outboards, black and red and silver, $156, $12 a month. Not that I was looking for it, but I went there, and you approach it with the reverence of a bank of urinals at a public arena, just eyes forward. You don't look right or left. You don't talk. You just sit there and bask in it. And then all of a sudden, this guy, he breaks the silence, and he says to me, "It's beautiful, isn't it?"